Hey, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. Seems kind of strange sitting in this thing here, but like I'm a judge at a trial. Today, looking in Joshua 22, King James used the term there at the end of the chapter, Ed, so it's like the story of Ed. But Ed, the word just means witness. This is where, in Joshua 22, where the 2.5 tribes who had worked out this thing with Moses back in Numbers 32, wanted to stay on, didn't want to cross over with their other tribes into the quote-unquote promised land. They want to stay where they were. So this point, again, Moses told me, we have to go and fight with the rest of them. You can't just stay here and avoid the conflict. So about 7 years later, gets to the point where Joshua calls them together. I said, okay, now you can go back. You kept your word. You can go back on the other side. So Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe Manasseh, they want to go back and settle on the eastern side. So they met the requirements that basically Moses laid out for them. But one thing I want to talk about later on, when they came to Moses and said they wanted to do this, at first Moses was upset. Thought they were trying to get out of something. Then Moses agreed to that. Okay, you got to keep your word. Then later in the chapter, there's a verse there that sometimes a lot of people take out of context. But if you don't do this, be sure your sin will find you out. So we'll find out if you don't basically keep your word. But there's nothing mentioned there where Moses asked God, should they be able to do this? They want to do this. He makes a deal. Says, okay, do this, but here's what you got to do. So this is going to come back. We'll talk about a little bit later here. And then basically the story from Joshua talks about the battles here and so forth, but that's where they're completed. They want to go back. So we'll start reading here in Joshua chapter 22, start verses 1 to 9. Then Joshua called the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, you have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice and all that I commanded you. You have not left your brethren these many days up to this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given you rest to your brethren, as he promised them. Now therefore return and go to your tents and to the land of your possession, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. But take careful heed, which is kind of like the key verse in this chapter, but take careful heed to do the commandment that the law and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. Now, to half the tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given a possession of Bashan, but to the other half of it, Joshua gave a possession among the brethren on this side of Jordan westward. And indeed, when Joshua sent them away to their tents, he blessed them and spoke to them, saying, return with much riches to your tent, and with very much livestock, with silver and gold, with bronze, with iron, and with very much clothing. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brethren. So the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh returned and departed from the children of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to the country of Gilead, to the land of their possessions, which they had obtained according to the word of the Lord by the hand of Moses. So now, basically, they're going back to where the land that they wanted to keep. Again, families had been left back there while they were fighting, so finally they're going to go back. And we see here in these verses, basically they were faithful in what they kept and the promise they made. But the question still lingers in my mind and some others I'm looking at, should they have been allowed to do that to begin with? Because the whole thing was over unity and so forth, but it seems like they want to be away. And later on, talked about when they put this altar up, and they want to call it Ed and the King James are witness, they said we were doing this for our children. So later on, they won't be accused of worshiping false gods. But when you read here, why they wanted to stay in that land to begin with, it was a good land for their livestock. it sounds like almost like they're really in it for the lay of the land, for the wealth and so forth that could be derived from it. But then later on, they're going to say, we did this, put this altar up for our children. And we'll see in later coming up here in Deuteronomy 32, they were forbidden to build an altar or any kind of thing like that unless God told them to do it. So there's some complications here, I should say contradiction between what they're saying and some of the actions they're doing. But either way, they basically had much riches, it says, very much cattle, silver, gold, brass, and a lot of raiment or clothing. So again, they were blessed in what they did as far as physical blessings anyway, from all the battles and so forth where they took the possessions and so forth with that. But again, the whole idea here with this unity and so forth, again, if you go to the New Testament, in the book of John and the epistles, John 17, Christ is this prayer there, wanting the disciples, Christians, to have unity. 1 John 1:7, if you walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another, and the blood of Jesus, Jesus Christ, his son, cleanses us from all sin. So the unity, now one thing to remember, in those days, even all the way up to the 20th century, when you go 5 miles to your neighbors and so forth, that's not just like getting in the car today and being there in a couple minutes. You got some time involved with it. And even in the United States, in the early part of the country, even into the 18th century, most people didn't go more than 50 miles from home, from the place they were born their whole life. Of course, many people did, but the average person didn't. So to have unity and so forth with people you never see is another thing that comes up as well. But again, there's a falling out here with them when they want to go over there. If we look back over in Deuteronomy 32, probably Deuteronomy 12 is the verse I mentioned. They're going to hear they built this wall. Phineas is going to go over with some others to check it out. And the people back on the other side of the river who went into the promised land, they're going to get nervous. And they're at the point they want to go to war because they knew what the scripture said. And basically, it's like they're violating that scripture. In Deuteronomy 12, going on down here, I don't want to read the whole chapter here. We get the last part here up to 14. Didn't mark it the exact place. Sorry, verse 13. Take heed to yourself that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every place that you see, but in the place which the Lord chooses, in one of your tribes. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, and you shall do all that I command you. But earlier in the chapter, I don't want to read all 14 verses, but they were told, prohibited from building altars in the land, except the ones God ordained them to have. And to the people back in the promised land who did not go over with them, it looks like they're just doing that very thing. But again, so they have this falling out. Now, there's two things here we see. Number one, it looks like they're ready for war. But one thing on these individuals led by Phineas, before they actually did that, Phineas and some others went over to see what was going on. If they basically, according to the text here, if you read into it here and see what they're saying, they're ready to go to war now. But cooler heads prevailed somewhat here, and they basically went over, sent Phineas and others that basically see what's going on, what their motives is, what they're doing. And Phineas here, if you look at verses 10 through 20, he basically gives two illustrations here about previous things that happened. In verse 10, we'll start looking in there. And when they came to the region of the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben, children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a great, impressive altar. Now the children of Israel heard someone say, behold, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan, in the region of the Jordan, of the children of Israel's side. And when the children of Israel heard this, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered together in Shiloh to go to war against them. Then the children of Israel sent Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, to the children of Reuben, and to the children of Gad, and to half the tribe of Manasseh, into the land of Gilead. And with him 10 rulers, one ruler from each of the chief house of every tribe in Israel, and each one was the head of the house of his father among the divisions of Israel. Then they came to the children of Reuben, to the children of Gad, and to half tribe of Manasseh, to the land of Gilead. And they spoke with them, saying, Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what treachery is this that you have committed against the God of Israel, to turn away this day from following the Lord, in that you have built for yourselves an altar, that you might rebel this day against the Lord? Is this the iniquity of Peor not enough for us, from which we are not cleansed till this day, although there was a plague in the congregation of the Lord? But you must turn away this day from following the Lord. And it shall be, if you rebel today against the Lord, that tomorrow he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. Nevertheless, if the land of your possession is unclean, then cross over to the land of the possession of the Lord, where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and take possession among us. But do not rebel against the Lord, nor rebel against us by building yourselves an altar besides the altar of the Lord our God. Did not Achan, the son of Zerah, commit a trespass in the accursed thing, and wrath fell on the congregation of Israel? And that man did not perish alone in his iniquity. Now, one thing too with the wall, they're looking at it, these individuals who go over, Phinehas and the others, they know what the law said. And to them, it looked like they're setting up a false altar. And part of the thing God told them to be, there was to be a testimony. So if you take the pagan people there, if they saw this altar they built there, this memorial that those tribes called it, what would they be thinking? It looks like they're basically left the God of the, I should say the God of the Bible, but the God of Moses, and now they're going to basically follow their own thing, and maybe even the law of the pagans and what they're doing out there as well. So the eastern tribes, they erect this altar. Perhaps they thought they were falling back on a patriarchal system. You go back, Noah used an altar, Abraham used an altar, Isaac used one, Jacob used one, and many concluded that it must be basically, they're just kind of following the law of Moses by building these altars. But the people who came over, they're concerned, just like in the matter of Achan. Achan sinned back in the book of Joshua. After the battle of Jericho and so forth, after they won, he took the garments and the gold and so forth when no one was to take it. He buried it, and then they go to a battle against Ai, and then 36 innocent people get killed because of the sin of Achan. So they're saying, look, you're doing this, but God may punish all of us, just like happened back then. So they're kind of nervous here that what might happen as a result of this. And this is the reason for this concern. So they go there, they question what's going on. And they basically, Israel is gathered in Shiloh for war because they basically want to get ready to take care of this. Ambassadors go over, and then basically they look into the subject. Again, Jesus told us, go to the New Testament a little bit, when a person sins against us, basically go to that person first and talk to them. So they didn't have that verse, of course, but it's the principle was there. They went to the people to find out, what's going on. And Phinehas and them pretty much accepted what they were saying, but it still leaves some question marks here. They built the altar when they shouldn't have built it, according to Deuteronomy 32. And then you got basically, they take their reason for building it, and then they leave and go back. And we don't really know a whole lot about the intermediate period there. Know the end, what happens with Israeli history through the judges, and then when Saul, David, and Solomon come through. But at this point, many I've read about here, they argue that basically why didn't they tear the wall down? Phinehas seems to basically, and the others there, the other 10, seemed to accept their reasoning. But many argue that should have basically tore the wall down. Because again, there was no principle to have it. And again, the children was the excuse. We did this for our children. So later on, they couldn't say, well, you're not part of us. This wall basically shows that. So they go over here in the verse we just read and basically talk to them. They state they built the altar not for religious purposes or anything like that. They had different intentions. They said, this is for our children in the future, so they would basically not be cast aside from them. But again, you go back to the original part we said earlier, why did they want to go? They say it was for our children's sakes this altar was built. But again, it's almost like Lot, when he's dividing up from Abraham, and he sees the well-watered plain out there, and that's what he's looking for. He's not looking at the future, what happens to his children, which turns out really bad. He's just looking at this, hey, this is a great land. We could do a lot of stuff here. And that's the same principle they're using here when they want to, these 2.5 tribes, they want to go take this land. Well, can we just stay here? And then later on said, well, we did this for our children. Well, it seems like they're really doing it for the same reason Lot wanted that land. It's a well-watered plain. We can do a lot of farming here and various things like that. And that's what they did. But again, of course, Phineas and the other 10 accept what they're saying. So they agreed that they ought not to rebel against God and worship on. So basically, they agree we're not going to worship another God. They agree with that. And they worked out a compromise where they're going to stay there anyway. But again, this whole principle here, why they're there, is a whole different story. Now, they say, again, they wanted a memorial there to remember, so children could remember they were a part of Israel too. Again, that's suspect somewhat with that. But they had an answer for why they did it. Now, they say this, built the wall for this reason. But again, there's a lot there we don't have, just basic narrative there with it. So what happened then and after that, we don't know the total thing. So again, they had a peaceful existence at that time. Now, in verses 30 to 34, we see Phineas here. He was pleased with what they said in verses 30 to 34. Now, when Phineas the priest and the rulers of the congregation, the heads of the divisions of Israel who were with him, heard the words that the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the children of Manasseh spoke, it pleased him. Then Phineas, the son of Eleazar the priest, said to the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the children of Manasseh, this day we perceive that the Lord is among us, because you have not committed in this treachery against the Lord. Now you have delivered the children of Israel out of the hand of the Lord. And Phineas, the son of Eleazar, the priest and the rulers, returned from the children of Reuben and the children of Gad from the children of Israel, and brought back word to them. So the thing pleased the children of Israel, and the children of Israel blessed God. They spoke no more of going against them in battle to destroy the land where the children of Reuben and Gad dwelt. The children of Reuben and the children of Gad called the altar witness. Again, King James says the altar, they call it Ed. For it is a witness between us and the Lord forever. So, but again, Phineas accepted what they said. They concluded that they had not transgressed God's will, which is, again, it stands out. In Deuteronomy 32, they were told not to build something like that. And then here they built something like that. And then basically, Phineas concludes that they basically had not transgressed God's will, which is still kind of leaves some questions open there for that. And then Phineas concluded that God was not going to punish them for their actions. Again, this is what Phineas is saying. Part of it too, question, I just have some questions in my mind about this. Phineas is a man, he's a priest here, son of a priest. He's a human being, so trying to determine what God will do or not do, knowing that they basically went against what God said here, and he concludes still that God's not going to punish him. So he returned to the rest of the people of Israel and told them the story of what had happened. And they, in turn, received the information and accepted it. So again, you could say they lived happily ever after, but we know Israel's history was not happily ever after, all this stuff that comes later with that. But again, one thing about it we learned, they basically did one thing that stands out here, and that is people need to hear the other side of the story. Proverbs talks about one person tells their side of the story. It sounds good. It's believable. Then you hear the other side of the story, and then it's not. I remember years ago over at school, where the school is in the back, we got about, I forget how many, 40 acres we got over there, something like that. And a lot of it's in the woods back there between the school and Andrews Air Force Base. And what the school did around Christmas time, they let students go up there, the teacher go up there to find a tree, cut it down and have a Christmas tree for the class. So one day, 2 students were up in the woods, and they shouldn't have been there. Just up there goofing around. And they got caught. And they said, basically, why are you here? And they said, well, the teacher at the time, Mrs. Baum, said we could come up here and cut a tree down for our classroom. Okay, that was true. She said that. But then when you talk to the teacher, she said sometime a couple of weeks before Christmas break, we'll go up there as a class and do that. Well, this is early November. So what they said sounded true, and it was true. They left part of it out. So when you find the other side of the story, and when you talk to students and they get in trouble, one asks what happened, they got in a fight or something. This person tells their side of the story. It sounds plausible. Then you hear someone else, and then there's some things the other person left out. So you got to get both sides of the story. So one thing they did do here, which was wise, is when Phineas and the people found out about it, they prepared for war, but before anything happened, they went and gave them a chance to tell their side of the story. Again, to me, looking at it, it's kind of a weak story, but at least they gave them a chance to tell it, and they accepted it at the time, which is all we know now, and we're talking about a few thousand years ago. So to us today, we're never going to find out here this side of heaven what really happened. But what we can learn from here, basically, to be fair with those we have a falling out with, which they had at that time. And Phineas basically goes over. He didn't have the book of Proverbs with him at that time. Proverbs talk about he that giveth the answer before he heareth it is a folly and a shame to him. Even Nicodemus in the New Testament, in chapter 7, when the Pharisees were making all these accusations, Nicodemus says, does our law judge any man before it hears him and know what he doeth? So again, the principle there is basically find out first. So the questions do come up on some of those things with that. Now, kind of concluding here, James Montgomery Boyce, he was more skeptical about some of their answers. And I'm going to close here with this, kind of how he was talking about this episode here. He says, what kind of witness was this huge pile of stones? Was it a witness to the unity of the nation and to the obedience of the Transjordan tribes? No, it was a witness to expediency. The wisdom of man is trying to enjoy the best of both worlds. The 2.5 tribes talked piously about their children, but it was their wealth that they really motivated their decisions to live east of the Jordan. So again, it's somewhat like here, the motives and so forth. There's a lot we don't know. Reminds me somewhat, go back to the book of Judges, chapter 11, with Jephthah's vow. Did he sacrifice his daughter, or did he not sacrifice his daughter? Some say it really happened. Some say, well, she just lived and never married and stayed a virgin all her life and no children. So you get this debate there. Again, with Jephthah there, though, that's a pagan thing there, the sacrifice. But Israel at that time was basically not living exactly under God's law. But human sacrifices were forbidden. So it leaves it kind of open-ended. What did Jephthah do? So somewhat here too, we know that they were forbidden to build an altar like that, but they built it anyway. And then basically it was what their excuse was basically good enough for Phinehas and the rest of the tribes there. And basically, one thing we know out of it, they did not go to war against each other. So it leaves a lot of questions open, but again, we're not going to get the answers to them. But it does show here basically the benefits of getting the whole story before we run off and make a judgment call. So we'll leave it at that here today. Does anyone have any comments or anything?